You brood of vipers. You're like the devil's own children, slithering around in the grass, striking unexpectedly. You're poisonous. You poison all those you come into contact with. And you think because you're baptized or because you come to church each week that that's going to help you. Who warned you to flee from the wrath to come? Good luck with that one. I've always wanted to try doing that. That's the sort of thing that John the Baptist and that the famous preachers of the kind of 17th and 18th century, I suppose, used to give their people, both barrels, so to speak, a bit of fire and brimstone. And astonishingly, more and more people come to John the Baptist, despite the fact that he insults them and criticises them. I was meeting with Bishop John near the start of my time as an ordained person, Bishop John, in Bradwell, to do a sort of regular checkup. And I said to him, it's quite difficult because the congregation I'm preaching to, Bishop, we're really in like different poles apart on kind of issues of social justice. And the amazing thing, though, I said, is that nobody's yet walked out of anything that I've been preaching. And he kind of chuckled and he said to me, for 35 years, I've been trying to preach something good enough that people will walk out. And no one had. So I live in hope. But John is saying some really kind of shocking things to the people here that we do well to dwell on just for a little bit to kind of get our heads around quite what he's going after. You brood of vipers, he calls them. You'll know that snakes don't get a very good reputation within the Hebrew religion, and they haven't got a terribly good reputation within ours either. They're the animals that call people to sin in the very first place in our creation narrative. They're the incarnation of the devil, if you like. They're the tempter, the ones who encourage humans to bring sin into the world. To be called the brood of vipers is to be called the devil's own children. They're the people who are in themselves poisonous and whose very words poison and tempt others into sinful behaviour. I was over in the States working and studying 2010 or something a bit like that. Is that right? No, maybe later than that, 2012. And I was working in downtown Oakland at a church. Father Mauricio was the priest in charge there, and there was an assistant priest, Father Christian. He was a Liberian man. I never worked out how old he was, like maybe 70 or maybe 90 or like somewhere in between. And he was part of a kind of proper old school Liberian Anglicanism. He didn't pull his punches at all. And one day we had this service of blessing of animals. Well, from the very start, he was there kind of murmuring and mumbling to himself and tutting away. And eventually, after the dogs and the cats being brought up, this young chap came up with his python wrapped around his shoulders. At which point, Father Christian couldn't control himself anymore, and he kind of got up and shouted out, "A snake in the sanctuary! A snake! The creature of evil!" And this poor young boy looked very worried about his snake that he'd brought. But for Father Christian, it was just kind of a step too far. He still really felt sort of in his bones that this creature was unclean and evil. Who warned you to flee from the wrath to come? John continues. As if almost he kind of wished that someone hadn't. As if he sort of thinks like, you deserve it, and I really would have liked to have seen you to face this wrath unprepared, like you would have just turned around and then there it was, and it gets you. A quite kind of unchristian sounding message from John. And then perhaps the thing that we most easily skip past, but which might have cut the deepest for those who are listening. Do not begin to say to yourselves, we have Abraham as our ancestor. That's the thing that's right at the heart of the Hebrew Testament's promises, that the children, the descendants of Abraham, have a special relationship with God, that they're this chosen people, that they're given a land, that they're to keep God's commandments, they're to be God's people, and God is to be their God. To kind of strip that away, it's like saying to us, oh, so you think your baptism's important, do you? And we want to respond like, well, yes, of course it is. Like the scriptures say it is, our tradition says it is. Every week our preachers tell us it's important. Of course it is. And John says, well, get rid of that. Level the playing field. But of course, for the Jewish people, it's more than just a kind of religious significance. It's their national significance as well. So it might well be someone saying to us, not just your baptism, but you think your nation's important. You think your nationality is important. The National Health Service that you benefit from, your pension, you think any of that's important? And we say, well, yes, of course we think that's important. He says, well, strip all of that away. And then to rub it in, he gives this very crude analogy. He says, and you know what happens, don't you, to trees that don't bear good fruit? Of course, all these local agricultural farming people are thinking, oh yeah, we understand you now, John. And then as if they're idiots, he says, you get an axe, and you chop it down, and you throw it into the fire. And you think at that stage, they must be thinking like, yeah, we understood it the first time you said it. You didn't really need to rub it in so deeply. But amazingly, they accept all this, the insults, the criticism thrown at them, and they say, well, what are we meant to do about it? And this is kind of John's defining and starring moment. He's piled and heaped all of this on them, and they've said, yes, we agree with you. And what are we to do about it? He's got a captive audience. They're hanging on his every word. What is this chief moral or ethical imperative that he can give them? What's the one thing that they can change that's going to remedy their evil lives? Have any of you got 2 coats, he says? Give one of them away. And the same thing if you've got more food than you need. It's not the kind of groundbreaking and shattering piece of advice that they might never have heard before. It seems sort of too easy, really. This is the main thing that you're doing wrong, inequality. And then the taxpayers and the soldiers come to him and he says, and those of you who've got power like these people, just don't abuse it. Iron out your inequalities. And for those of you who have got power, don't abuse it. And that's as much, if not, I guess, more of an immediate call for us today than it was even for them. Often, when we're reading Scripture and thinking of its relevance and its import to us, we need to do some kind of updating of the changes that have taken place in society over 2,000 years. And every now and then, we're struck by the fact that we don't. It was probably about this time last year, November, December, something like that. I was chatting to the chap who sells the Big Issue outside Marks and Spencer's, and he didn't have any gloves on. And I was asking him about this, and he said, well, I don't have a pair of gloves. And I said to him, like, here, have my pair. I've got another one at home. Like, quite literally, I've got 2 pairs of gloves. Like, here, have one of them. And it struck me then, and it strikes me still, that could have been kind of ripped straight off the page, that still we suffer from this fact that lots of us, anyone got 2 coats? Lots of us have got 2 coats, and yet we know that there are people, even within our community, and of course further afield, who don't. Anyone got a full fridge? And yet we know that people in greater and greater numbers within our own nation are reaching for food banks at this time of year. And John's point is that everybody has something that they can do. Yes, of course, at the time, the Roman occupiers were fiercely oppressing the people. Yes, of course, there were the Herodians, the local political leaders who were in cahoots with the Romans and who were acting in unlawful and immoral ways. Yes, of course, Starbucks should pay more of its tax, and then there wouldn't be such a burden on our systems. But what John is saying is that even for you, little fry, you who've only got 2 coats, there's still something for you to be doing. It's a question about how we make use of our own resources and our own money. And it's a kind of earthy and a gritty command. It's not about words of absolution. He doesn't say, what you need to do is go to the priest and sacrifice a dove, or he doesn't say what you need to do is make your confession and then pray 15 Hail Marys. He says, go out there, do something about it. Don't moan about those who should be doing something who aren't. Just get on with your own business. And in this way, he differs a bit from the other prophets who are more sort of social commentators of the injustice that they see around them in the world. And of course, John does do a bit of that. I mean, don't forget that the reason that he ends up beheaded is that he's telling the Herodians that they're acting in immoral ways. But he also recognizes that each little individual, those people who feel like they can't possibly change the world, their doing something is the first step. So work at it every day. Make it a habit of virtue, so that the times when you really need it, that you really need to fall back upon it, the practice is all there, that you're used to working in those ways. So he's insulted them. He's insulted their faith, their ancestors. He's told them to give away their possessions. He's told them that a powerful judge is on his way. And then we read in Luke's hand that with these and so many other exhortations, he proclaimed the good news to the people. This is all good news, and the important thing is that it's not good news just to those people who don't have any coats, who now think that they might be in line for 1 or 2. It's not just good news to the abused, the downtrodden and the poor. It's good news to the rich too. And I suspect that we can count ourselves certainly globally and quite possibly locally among that number. It's good news for those people who have 2 coats to be told that they need to be shaken up, that they need to give one of those coats away. It's good news for those who are giving, not just for those who are receiving. And we know that this is true. The scriptures tell us this is true. Our wisdom tells us this is true. Modern studies of happiness tell us this is true. The reason that people are happy at Christmas is not because they're receiving presents. It's because they're giving them. This is the thing that makes us happy. I'll leave you with one more story about good news and about the judgment that John tells us is coming. I worked in London at a church called St. Martin within Ludgate. It's on Ludgate Hill between St. Paul's and Fleet Street. And every morning I was joined for morning prayer by a homeless man called James, who was a saint of a man and changed my life in many ways. And at morning prayer, we'd read the scriptures and then we'd pause and we'd have a little chat about what we thought about them. And very rarely did he say anything. He normally just listened. And we were reading a passage just like this about the coming judgment. And I said, well, gosh, that's a bit frightening. And he said, well, actually, I'm really looking forward to it. And it struck me as a really strange thing to say. But he was a person who cared for the poor, who gave far more than he could ever afford. And for him, it was like the school child who, having done this excellent piece of homework over the weekend, hands it in on Monday, and then they just can't wait till Wednesday to get it back from the teacher and to see the mark on it. And he just couldn't wait for judgment because he was so looking forward to being cradled by Christ and told, well done, James, welcome to the kingdom, to the place I've prepared for you. So I pray that you can have that same experience of awaiting the coming of Christ this Advent and always. Amen.